The sun dipped low over Willow Creek Park, casting long shadows across the playground, where kids squealed and darted between slides and swings. Amid the laughter, a woman stood alone, her shoulders slumped, clutching a tattered backpack as she watched her young son play. Her name was Sarah, a single mom in her early 30s, with tired eyes that carried the weight of too many sleepless nights. She adjusted her worn hoodie, trying to blend into the background, but her quiet presence seemed to draw the wrong kind of attention. Three men in their 20s, all swagger and sneers, lounged on a nearby bench, their loud voices slicing through the evening air like a blade. They pointed at Sarah, their laughter sharp and cruel, mocking her faded clothes and the way she hovered protectively over her son, Ethan. Little did they know, someone was watching. Someone who'd spent years training for moments just like this. Someone whose shadow was about to turn their world upside down. Hey, if this hook's got you gripped, smash that subscribe button and join our storytelling crew for more heart-pounding tales like this. Sarah's son, Ethan, a wiry 6-year-old with a mop of curly brown hair, was lost in his own world, giggling as he scaled the jungle gym, his small hands gripping the bars with fierce determination. Sarah forced a smile, but her heart twisted like a knot. She'd moved to this sleepy Ohio town a year ago, chasing a fresh start after a divorce that left her with nothing but debt and a fierce love for her son. The park was Ethan's sanctuary, a place where he could be a kid, free from the whispers of neighbors who judged her for scraping by on food stamps. But now, even this haven felt tainted. The leader of the trio, a stocky guy named Derek, with a backwards cap and a smirk that screamed trouble, called out, "Hey lady, what's with the thrift store vibes? You homeless or just cheap?" His buddies, Kyle and Mitch, erupted in laughter, egging him on like hyenas. Sarah's cheeks burned, but she kept her eyes on Ethan, pretending not to hear. Inside, her stomach churned. She'd faced bullies before, but this felt different, like a predator circling prey. The men didn't stop. Derek stood, stretching his arms like he owned the park, and sauntered closer, his boots crunching on the gravel. "What's the kid's deal? Bet he's embarrassed of his mom looking like that," he said, loud enough for other parents to glance over, their faces a mix of discomfort and cowardice. Sarah's hands clenched into fists, but she stayed silent, her focus locked on Ethan, who was now chasing a butterfly near the swings, his laughter a fragile shield against the ugliness. She didn't want him to see her crumble, didn't want him to feel the shame she was fighting to swallow. But Derek wasn't done. He picked up a pebble and tossed it toward her, missing by inches. "Dupes, my bad," he sneered, as Kyle and Mitch howled. The other parents looked away, too spineless to intervene. Sarah's heart raced. She wanted to scream, to fight back, but she felt small, powerless, a mouse cornered by wolves. What could she do against 3 grown men? She didn't know that help was already barreling toward her, and it wasn't the kind anyone saw coming. Across town, in a modest apartment lined with military memorabilia, a man named Jake was lacing up his boots, his movements precise, deliberate. At 35, Jake was a Navy SEAL on leave, visiting his younger sister Sarah for the first time in months. He'd been deployed overseas for most of Ethan's life, but the bond he shared with Sarah was forged in fire. Growing up in foster homes, dodging their parents' chaos, they'd been each other's anchor. Jake had always been her protector, and when he'd gotten her text earlier that day asking if he could meet her at the park, he'd sensed a tremor in her words. Sarah wasn't one to ask for help unless the world was pressing down hard. He grabbed his keys, his broad frame moving with the quiet menace of a man trained to tame chaos. As he drove toward Willow Creek, his phone buzzed with another text from Sarah, and just at the park with Ethan. "Don't worry, we're fine." But Jake knew his sister's code. Fine meant trouble, and he was already shifting gears, his truck eating up the miles. Back at the park, the situation was spiraling into something uglier. Derek had escalated from words to action, snatching Ethan's soccer ball from the grass and kicking it hard toward the parking lot. Ethan froze, his lip trembling as he watched his favorite ball roll out of sight, its faded red surface bouncing across the asphalt. "Go get it, kid," Derek taunted, stepping closer to Sarah, his shadow looming. "Or maybe your mom can fetch it, since she's so good at picking up scraps." Sarah's voice finally broke through, low but firm, a mother's steel cutting through her fear. "Leave us alone," she said, stepping between Derek and Ethan. Her voice shook, but her eyes blazed, daring them to cross her. Derek laughed, towering over her. Or what? You gonna cry about it? Kyle and Mitch circled closer, their grins wide, feeding off Derek's bravado like vultures on a kill. The other parents were now openly staring, but no one moved, their silence a betrayal. Sarah felt trapped, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter her ribs. Then, from the edge of the park, a shadow moved, silent, purposeful, unstoppable. Jake's truck rolled into the lot just as the soccer ball came to a stop near a curb. He stepped out, his 6'2" frame moving with a calm that masked the storm brewing inside. Dressed in a simple black t-shirt and jeans, he didn't look like a SEAL at first glance, just another guy, maybe a dad or an uncle. But his eyes, sharp as a blade, missed nothing. He saw the three men crowding Sarah, saw Ethan's wide-eyed fear, saw the way Sarah's shoulders tensed as she shielded her son. Jake's training kicked in, his senses locking onto every detail. Derek's aggressive stance, Kyle's nervous twitch, Mitch's half-step back like he sensed the air shifting. Jake picked up the soccer ball, rolling it in his hands as he approached, his steps deliberate like a panther stalking through tall grass. The bullies didn't notice him at first, too drunk on their power trip, but Sarah did. Her eyes flicked to him, and for a split second, relief flooded her, followed by dread. She knew what Jake could do, and it terrified her. "Shay!" Jake called out, his voice steady but carrying an edge that sliced through the noise like a gunshot. The three men turned, sizing him up. Derek smirked, tossing his head back. "Tch, what's this? Your boyfriend coming to save you?" he said to Sarah, laughing. Jake didn't respond. He walked closer, stopping, a few feet away, the soccer ball still in his hands. You dropped something," he said, tossing the ball gently to Ethan, who caught it with a shy smile. Jake's eyes never left Derek's. "You got a problem here?" he asked, his tone deceptively calm, like the quiet before a detonation. Derek scoffed, stepping forward. "Yeah, we got a problem. Her," he said, jabbing a finger toward Sarah. "She's bringing down the vibe of this place." Kyle and Mitch chuckled, but their laughter faltered when Jake took another step, his presence filling the space like a thundercloud rolling in. Sarah grabbed Ethan's hand, pulling him behind her. "Jake, it's okay," she whispered, her voice pleading. She didn't want this to explode, didn't want Ethan to see the violence she knew Jake could unleash, but Jake's eyes were locked on Derek, reading every micro movement, the way his fists clenched, the slight shift in his weight. Years of training had taught Jake to spot threats before they became lethal, and Derek was teetering on that edge. "Walk away," Jake said, his voice low, almost a growl, the kind that makes your bones feel cold. Derek laughed, but it was forced now, his confidence cracking like thin ice. "Or what, tough guy?" he said, stepping into Jake's space. That was his first mistake, and it was about to be his last. What happened next was so fast it felt like time itself held its breath. Derek swung a sloppy punch, aiming for Jake's jaw. Jake moved like liquid lightning, sidestepping the blow with ease, his hand snapping out to catch Derek's wrist. In one fluid motion, he twisted Derek's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees with a pained grunt that echoed across the park. Kyle lunged forward, but Jake was already moving, his free hand shoving Kyle back with enough force to send him stumbling into Mitch. The two crashed into the bench, their bravado evaporating like smoke. Derek struggled, cursing, but Jake leaned down, his voice a lethal whisper that sent chills through the onlookers. "Oh, no, you don't talk to my sister like that. You don't talk to any woman like that, not if you understand." Derek, red-faced and gasping, nodded frantically, his ego crumbling under Jake's grip. Jake released him, and Derek scrambled to his feet, backing away, his eyes wide with something new, fear. The park was silent now, the other parents and kids staring wide-eyed, frozen in awe. Sarah's hands trembled as she held Ethan close, her eyes locked on Jake. She was grateful but terrified. This wasn't the brother she wanted Ethan to see, the one who could dismantle three men without breaking a sweat. Jake turned to her, his face softening, the warrior fading back into the brother she knew. "You okay?" he asked, his voice gentle now, like a breeze after a storm. Sarah nodded, tears welling up. I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice cracking. Jake knelt beside Ethan, ruffling his hair. "You're safe, buddy," he said, his tone warm, grounding. Ethan clutched his soccer ball, looking up at Jake with wide, sparkling eyes. "Are you a superhero?" he asked, his voice small but full of wonder. Jake chuckled, but his eyes were heavy, carrying the weight of a life spent in shadows. "Just your uncle," he said. "Win." The bullies were already retreating, Derek muttering curses under his breath, as Kyle and Mitch dragged him toward the parking lot, their tails between their legs. But Jake wasn't done. He called after them, his voice carrying across the park like a judge's gavel. "Oh, and you come back here, you mess with anyone else, and you'll deal with me again. Trust me, you don't want that." The threat hung in the air, final and unyielding, a promise carved in stone. The trio didn't look back, their swagger reduced to a hurried shuffle. The other parents finally stirred, some whispering, others nodding in quiet approval. One older woman approached Sarah, touching her arm gently. "I'm sorry I didn't say anything," she said, her voice thick with guilt. "And you've got a good brother there." Sarah managed a weak smile, but her heart was still racing, caught between gratitude and the fear of what could have been. As the sun sank below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and shadow, Jake walked Sarah and Ethan to his truck, the park now quiet behind them. Sarah was silent, her mind replaying the moment Derek's pebble flew past her, the way her heart had screamed to protect Ethan but her body had frozen. "Jake," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, you didn't have to do that." Jake glanced at her, his jaw tight, his eyes still scanning the surroundings out of habit. "Yeah, I did," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "And no one gets to make you feel small, Sarah, not ever." Sarah looked away, tears spilling over, hot and silent. She'd spent so long fighting to be strong for Ethan, to prove she could do this alone, that she'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand in her corner, unyielding, unbreakable. The drive home was quiet, the hum of the truck's engine a steady counterpoint to the storm of emotions swirling inside Sarah. Jake glanced at her, seeing the exhaustion etched into her face, the lines deeper than they'd been a year ago. "Oh, you're doing good, you know," he said, his voice softer now, easing him. "You're stronger than you think." Sarah shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "And I don't feel strong," she said, her voice raw. "And I feel like I'm failing him every day." Jake's hand tightened on the wheel, his knuckles whitening. "Oh, and you're not," he said firmly, his words a lifeline. "And you're not alone. I'm here now. For both of you." Ethan, half asleep in the back seat, murmured, "Uncle Jake, will you teach me to kick the ball like you?" Jake smiled, the first real smile of the evening, warm enough to melt the tension. "You got it, kid," he said, his voice a promise. When they reached Sarah's small apartment, Jake carried Ethan inside, the boy dozing against his shoulder, his soccer ball tucked under one arm. Sarah watched them, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and guilt. She'd spent so long trying to shield Ethan from the world's cruelty, but today had shown her she couldn't do it alone, and maybe she didn't have to. Jake stayed for dinner, the three of them eating cheap spaghetti at a wobbly kitchen table, laughing as Ethan recounted his butterfly chase with the earnestness only a 6-year-old could muster. For the first time in months, Sarah felt a flicker of hope, like the world wasn't entirely against her, like she could breathe without bracing for the next blow. New paragraph. That night, after Ethan was tucked into bed, Sarah and Jake sat on the sagging couch in her dimly lit living room, the silence between them heavy with unspoken truths. A single lamp flickered, casting soft shadows on the walls, where a few framed photos of Ethan's milestones hung. His first steps, his gap-toothed grin at a birthday party, moments Sarah had clawed to create despite the odds. She sipped a mug of tea, her hands still trembling slightly, while Jake leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. "I should have been here sooner," he said, his voice rough, like the words were being dragged out of him. "I knew things were tough, but I didn't know how bad it got." Sarah shook her head, setting her mug down with a clink. "You couldn't have known, Jake. You were halfway across the world, doing what you do." Her voice wavered, caught between gratitude and the ache of years spent carrying her burdens alone. She told him about the late-night shifts at the diner, the landlord's threats when rent was late, the way Ethan's shoes were wearing thin because she couldn't afford new ones. Jake listened, his in places I can't even name. You think I won't fight for you?" Tears streamed down her face now, not from shame, but from the weight of his words. The realization that she wasn't just surviving anymore. She was seen. She was loved. Jake pulled her into a hug, the kind they'd shared as kids when the world felt too big, and for the first time in years, Sarah let herself believe things could change. The next morning, Jake was already on the phone, calling in favors, setting up interviews for Sarah at a local community center that needed a receptionist. A job with steady hours and enough pay to keep Ethan in new shoes. As Sarah watched him, her heart swelled with a fierce hope, the kind that could rebuild a life from ashes. As Jake left that night, he paused at the door, looking back at Sarah with a rare vulnerability in his eyes. If anyone ever bothers you again, you call me. Day or night," he said, his voice a vow. Sarah nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "So I will," she promised, meaning it. Jake hugged her, then stepped into the night, his silhouette fading into the darkness like a guardian slipping back into the shadows. Sarah stood there, feeling the weight of his promise settle over her like armor. She wasn't just a single mom struggling to get by. She was a sister, a fighter, and now she knew she had a protector who'd move mountains to keep her safe. The next day, word of the park incident spread through town like wildfire. The bullies didn't show their faces at Willow Creek again, their names now whispered with a mix of scorn and fear. Sarah started taking Ethan to the park more often, her head held a little higher, her steps a little surer. Jake visited every chance he got, teaching Ethan how to kick a soccer ball with precision, telling him stories of far-off places, minus the classified parts, of course. Sarah began to rebuild piece by piece, her confidence growing with every small victory, a new job, a smile from Ethan, a night without fear. The park, once a place of dread, became a symbol of something else, resilience, family, and the kind of strength that doesn't need fists to prove itself. And that's the story of a single mom, a Navy SEAL, and a moment that changed everything. Thanks for watching this tale of courage and comeback. Hit that like button if it hit you in the feels, and subscribe for more stories that'll keep you glued to your screen. Now tell me in the comments, from which part of the country are you watching this video? Let's see where our viewers are tuning in from.